Let's talk about the regular season. The good, the bad, and the ugly.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Year in review. Hello, everyone. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse, and thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day, and of course, we are always free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we are going to talk about the Orange's regular season from start to finish. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And before we get to everything, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Syracuse basketball finished the season on a high note. On Saturday night, they beat Virginia by 14 points, which was a good way to end the year. Syracuse basketball overall finished the season 13-18 with a 7-13 record in the ACC. Of course, there's a lot of bad to talk about, and we're going to get to the ugly later on in the podcast. But first, we are going to discuss some of the good that came from this season. And before we get to the good, was there anything in your opinion that was good about this season? Leave a comment in the comments section below right now. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I tried coming up with some good things and I was able to do it, but they're not exactly the greatest of good things to have. Get what I'm saying here? Kind of grasping at straws here to find some good from this season. But regardless, number one, they are playing their best basketball of the season right now as we enter the ACC tournament. And that's ideal. For any college basketball team out there, you want to be playing your best basketball at this point of the season because it's great to look good in December and it's great to look good in January and even in the early parts of February. But let's be honest, it's all about this time of year. Conference tournament into the NCAA tournament. You want to be playing your best basketball at this time of the year, and Syracuse basketball is doing exactly that. They have played 8 games since that game against Duke. If I'm being nice, it was a game. They lost that one by 29 points, but since that moment, the Orange in the 8 games following the Duke one, they've only lost one of them by 10 or more points. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because one of the low marks of the Adrian Autry tenure so far, which is in its finale of its second year, I guess, but one of the hallmarks of it has been a lot of blowouts. When Syracuse basketball typically loses games, they get crushed. But since that Duke game, they've only lost one of those games by 10 plus points, and that was against Pitt, a team in which they had a double-digit lead in the second half, and they still managed to lose by 10 plus, but they did have a double-digit lead in that one. Furthermore, even though lately they have been blowing these big leads, right? We know what they are, the Pitt, Virginia Tech, SMU. At least Syracuse is showing that they're good enough to actually build a big lead. There have been multiple points over these past few games where Syracuse, you would hear it on the broadcast, they've opened up their largest lead in ACC play this season. It's happened multiple times. Now, the key going forward into the ACC tournament is very simple. You got to be able to hold on to these leads because now it's never good enough to blow a lead, but now if Syracuse blows a big lead, their season's over. There is no more tomorrow from here on out. It is a one-game season. But at least lately, they have been showing that they are somewhat capable of being a good basketball team. They're just going to have to sustain it for 40-plus minutes. They are playing their best right now. Another good part of this season, again, I'm kind of grasping here, but they did not lose to any mid-major teams. And it wasn't necessarily pretty. Those first 3 games of the season, remember them? Lemoyne, Colgate, Youngstown State was a double overtime thriller. Thriller in air quotes. They beat them. They also nearly blew a game to Cornell, and they did beat UAlbany and Bucknell pretty easily. But overall, they avoided the major embarrassment of losing to mid-major teams. And one good thing of the Adrian Autry tenure so far in 2 years, and I'm a big Adrian Autry critic, don't get me wrong, but he's 11-0 against mid-major teams in his 2 seasons at Syracuse. I don't count the Chaminade game from a year ago because Chaminade isn't mid-major. Chaminade is a Division II basketball program that Syracuse played last year in Maui. But of the mid-major teams, Syracuse under Adrian Autry in his first 2 years, they have not lost. And hopefully going forward, not only do they continue not losing against the mid-major opponents, but also they start looking prettier against these mid-major opponents. If you recall, at the beginning of the season, the first net rankings came out, I want to say, right before the Tennessee game. It was about 5 or 6 games into the year, give or take. And Syracuse was ranked 175 in the net. Why do you think they were ranked so low in the net? Which, by the way, does matter when you're trying to make an NCAA tournament. But obviously, they're not going to make it at large. But at the time, you still kind of have that false hope that they had a chance. They barely beat the mid-majors, and that hurts your net and your Ken Palm significantly when you barely beat those inferior teams. So going forward, not only do they have to avoid the losses, because if you lose to those teams, it can quite literally end your season in November and early December, but also they're going to have to start beating a lot of these teams by 20-plus points next year. If they want to be a really good team and get back in the tournament, they're going to have to do what tournaments teams do, and that's blow out mid-majors. And the final good thing, I guess, from this season, and it's not really an accomplishment, but at least they made the ACC tournament. There was a real rock bottom, which we did not get to, thankfully. The rock bottom would have been missing the ACC tournament because for the first time ever, the conference expanded to 18 teams, and they're only taking 15 in the conference tournament, which means 3 teams are not playing any more basketball this season. Those 3 teams this year were Boston College, Miami, and NC State. Not in that particular order. Those are just the 3 teams that missed out on the conference tournament. I'm telling you, there's a whole new level of embarrassment when it comes to missing the conference tournament outright compared to Syracuse just having a really bad year, right? The brand has already been hurt bad enough, but missing the conference tournament is a step below. It's even worse. And so I'm glad that Syracuse at least found a way to win some critical games over the course of this season to where they have an opportunity to win 5 games in 5 days and pull off a miracle. Right? They beat Cal on the road, the second game in the California road trip. That was a big one that Syracuse had to win. Beating Boston College in triple overtime. No, it wasn't a pretty game, but they had to win it, and they got it done. And then NC State just a couple of weeks ago, which was essentially a do-or-die game. Because if Syracuse loses to NC State, they are both tied for the last spot in the conference. And just the momentum of that game, I don't know if Syracuse ends up making the conference tournament. I know the math ends up working out to where they would have, because I believe NC State just lost out and Syracuse beat Virginia, so it would have been enough. But the psyche of it, we don't really know what would have happened if Syracuse lost to NC State. And to their credit, not only did they beat NC State, they beat them down inside the Dome just a couple of weeks ago. So those were the good parts, I guess, of this season. They're playing their best basketball right now, which is good. They didn't lose a mid-major game. That's good. And at least they made the conference tournament, which is not much of an accomplishment, but it's better than not making the conference tournament. Having said that, there's just not a lot of good from this season. And coming up, we'll talk about the bad and the ugly here on Locked On Syracuse. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. You need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free TradeMaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of steel professionals are already taking advantage, and now it's your turn. Join the TradeMaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Your home should reflect your style, and with WayFair, it's easier than ever to make that happen. Whether you're looking for a simple refresh or tackling a big home project, WayFair is everything you need in one place. Wayfair's huge selection makes it easy to find the perfect piece, no matter your space or budget. From cozy furniture and stylish decor to kitchen essentials and outdoor must-haves, Wayfair has it all, and at prices that fit your budget. I was looking for a new rug to tie my living room together, and Wayfair had so many stylish options at great prices. Head over to wayfair.com and find something that's just your style today. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. We talked about the good. Now let's get to the bad of Syracuse basketball's season. And there was a lot of bad. Number one was the coaching. And we'll talk about the defense of the coaching in just a moment. But if we're being real, I understand that there were injuries. I understand that Syracuse did not have the most NIL to work with. But did Adrian Autry and this coaching staff really squeeze the most it could out of this year's team? I say no. I would love to hear what you think in the comments section below, but I don't believe they did. I believe that this team should have been better than 13-18 overall and 7-13 in the ACC. If you go look at Evan Maya, which is a great college basketball analytics website, you will come to find that most of Syracuse's rotation players this season underperformed relative to their preseason expectations. It wasn't just one or two players. It was essentially everyone. There were only a few exceptions, which we've talked about before. Peter Mastorovich, Lucas Taylor, Elijah Choppa-Moore. The reason why those guys are exceptions is because they didn't really have any expectations heading into the season. So the fact that they provided something means that they outperformed their preseason expectation on Evan Maya. But from everyone else, all the big-name players, J.J. Starling, Chris Bell, Eddie Lampkin even, Carlos, Davis, even Donnie Freeman when he was healthy, they all underperformed on Evan Maya's analytical tool. Is that a coincidence? Not really. At some point, coaching has to play a role. I understand that there were injuries, and I understand that this is not a Final Four caliber roster on paper, but coaching matters. And I don't believe that Adrian Autry and this staff squeezed everything it could out of this year's team. Let's talk about the offense and defense, because I told you we're going to talk about the defense, all right? Offense. Last offseason, Syracuse lost some pretty significant pieces on offense. Judah Mintz, the main one, Quadir Copeland as well, and even to a lesser extent, Malik Brown, because he averaged about 10 points a game when he was with Syracuse. However, Syracuse's offensive output from last season to this season was actually pretty comparable. In 2024, they averaged 76.3 points a game, and that was good for 6th in the ACC. But in 2025, they averaged 75.6 points a game, and it was good for 7th in the ACC. So it was a slight drop in offensive output from last year to this year, but it wasn't too much of a drop. So the issue is really on the defensive end. And if we're being honest, I don't know what it is, but this team over the past 2 seasons has been awful defensively. They can't even be mediocre. The numbers do not lie, and it's concerning because we better hope that this is not just some trend and that this is going to continue in year 3. If Syracuse wants to have any sort of aspirations next year, they have to be much better defensively than they've been over the past 2 seasons. In 2024, they average 75.6 points allowed per game. That was 3rd worst in the ACC. In 2025, so this season, 78.4 points allowed per game. That was 2nd worst in the conference. You can thank Miami for being a whole lot worse than Syracuse. Adrian Autry, he likes to run a man-to-man defense, and if that's not working, he'll sometimes switch to a zone defense, but it doesn't matter what scheme he uses. This team has not really been able to play any sort of defense over the past 2 seasons. And think of it like this. It's not even just the personnel, because Syracuse had Malik Brown last year, who was an elite defender. Quadair Copeland, I believe, got ACC Defensive Player of the Year vote or 2. I think he did, if I remember correctly. And yet they were still 3rd worst in the conference in defense. Yeah, that's not good. Again, if Syracuse wants any sort of aspirations of being a tournament team next year, their defense has to be a whole lot better. Just make it mediocre. Mediocre might be good enough. It just can't be one of the worst in the whole conference. That's the coaching side. Let's get to the players because, of course, they deserve blame as well. They absolutely deserve blame. Again, 2 things can be true. Coaching can be bad and the players can be bad. We're going to talk specifically about the returners and the transfers because we did Poll Fridays on them. And next week, or actually I should say this week, the Poll Friday will be about the freshmen and grading them. But we got to hold the returners and the transfers accountable as well for how bad this season has gone. Just off the top of your head, who had a good year? Who had a good year of the returners and the transfers? Who would you say had a good year? Comment in the comment section below. Eddie Lampkin, maybe? He averaged 12 points and 10 rebounds. He was essentially Eddie Lampkin. He doesn't play a lick of defense. He's a good passer. He could score a little in the post. And he can rebound. Okay, so he had a decent year. I gave him a B when we talked about the transfer portal. JJ Starling, he averaged 18 points a game, which is great. Thumbs up, right? But did he really have that good of a year? Shooting 40% from the field, 26% from the 3-point line. He was more of a volume scorer than he was an actually really good scorer. Of course, I would like him back for next season, but it has to be in a much more reduced role. He simply cannot handle at least what he did this season. He just can't. But aside from Lampkin and Starling, who else would you even consider having a good year from the returners and the transfers? I think Chris Bell deserves a lot of blame for how bad this season has gone, because we at least hoped that he would break even from where he was at a year ago, which was shooting 42% from the 3-point line. That was 2nd best in the ACC. The hope was that he would expand his game a little bit more. And I thought after that first game, and I know it was against Lemoyne, but I thought after that first game, Chris Bell, he has a high point total. I think he scored maybe 20 points in that one. Most of it coming from 2s and getting to the basket and putting the ball on the floor. I thought he had expanded his game. But really, that was just a mirage. He did not really expand his game from last year to this year. And what's worse is that he regressed from the 3-point line. He shot 36.5% from the 3-point line, which is not bad. It's actually a pretty good 3-point total. The issue is it's Chris Bell. He doesn't do anything else on the floor that's good. He's not a positive in any other statistical category. It's his 3-point shooting. So if he's not shooting at an elite level, he is a liability on the floor, and he did not shoot an elite level from the three-point line this season. That makes him much more of a liability. Jake Juan Carlos, he's playing better as of late, but he was awful for most of this season. Jair Davis and Lucas Taylor, I guess they've been relatively okay given their roles. But even then, they're playing better now than they have been throughout the entirety of the season. Jair Davis is interesting because his field goal percentage is up, his three-point percentage is way up, but his free throw shooting really regressed this season. Last year, he was at 81% from the free throw line. This year, for whatever reason, he shot 63% from the free throw line. And folks, in case you don't know, it doesn't matter whether you play high major or mid-major, the free throw line does not change. It's the same exact distance. But it regressed by 18% this season. Coaches deserve blame for this season being bad, and the players deserve blame as well. And coming up, we'll talk about the ugly of this Syracuse basketball regular season and hope that they can learn from it here on Locked On Syracuse. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. Now, there's usually a couple of Cinderella stories every year, but as far as who's going to cut down the nets, that's usually going to be one of the favorites, right? The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No more waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Let's discuss the ugly of Syracuse basketball's regular season. This is where we really get negative here on Locked On Syracuse. But then we'll put a little positive spin at the end of this segment. All right? Here we go. Number one, in the crappiest of crap ACCs, a conference that might only get 3 teams in the NCAA tournament: Duke, Louisville, and Clemson. Syracuse was not only one of the teams that couldn't take advantage of it or that could be mediocre. Syracuse was one of the main reasons why this conference was as crappy as it was. The ACC is bound to be better next season because it cannot possibly get much worse than it actually was. There was not a single ranked versus ranked matchup all year in the ACC. That has not happened in this conference since the 1966-67 season. In other words, this should have been a year where teams should have been just taking advantage of this. Syracuse, hello, this was your chance. And instead, they were one of the main contributors of the conference being this bad. It makes you think for a moment. What if Syracuse basketball was in a different high major conference? What if they were in the SEC or the Big Ten or the Big 12? Do they even win 3 conference games in those conferences? Do they even win a game in those conferences? I think the ACC truly masked how bad Syracuse actually was. They were one of the worst high major teams in college basketball this season. And I see a lot of folks commenting that this has been the worst year I've ever seen. And you would be correct in all likelihood. If you were born 1970 or later, this is the worst Syracuse basketball team ever. Seriously, it's the worst regular season since 1969. So if you were born 1970 or later, you've never seen worse. That's ugly, right? But let's now talk about the offseason, which might be the ugliest part about this whole thing, because it all stems from last offseason. fact that Syracuse's NIL budget was only around $2 million, it was a little bit above, according to the article. That's not good enough. You're not going to compete for a national championship with that small of an NIL budget. Now, should Syracuse still have been better this season? Yes, because that was middle of the road in the ACC, and they were not middle of the road in the ACC. And even with the injuries, I get it. They still should have been a lot better than what they were. But it's also not good enough to compete for a championship. The system in college basketball is designed to where if you do have a small budget, as long as you're playing in your conference tournament, you're going to have a chance. Because at the end of the day, when Syracuse and Florida State play tomorrow, it's not about who has the most NIL dollars, it's who can win that one game. And then so on and so forth. The system is designed to have some Cinderellas every single year. I'm not trying to sit here and say that Syracuse is going to be one of those teams. And even to a lesser extent, you could still make the NCAA tournament with an at-large bid with a smaller budget, right? If you hit some home runs in the portal, you get some guys on cheaper deals and they pop off, they develop. That has happened. Hunter Salas, when he came from Gonzaga to Wake Forest, he wasn't much. And then all of a sudden he pops off at Wake Forest in his first year. That can happen. But it's not good enough to compete for a championship. And also the fact that Syracuse's staff was completely unprepared for the transfer portal. And we try to sit here and let it be an excuse and be like, that's okay. You weren't prepared. That's not okay to not be prepared. But here's where we now talk about the positive going forward. They're not making a change to the coaching staff. We're not going to sit here and debate that again. I already had that episode. But as far as learning from this past offseason, I think Syracuse has done a relatively decent job at that. They hired a GM. So that should help. Alex Kline is the GM. He should help with being prepared for the transfer portal and understanding player value and contracts and who might enter the portal and convincing players to enter the portal. Yes, I'm saying tamper. Hopefully he can do a good job with that and help the staff this offseason. It makes you also think, why was he hired last summer? Why wasn't he hired before the transfer portal last year? Probably should have. But you know what? Better late than never. And number two, the NIL should be better. It should be. I mean, they're going to Vegas, so that's a free million right there. You just have to show up to that tournament and you get $1 million. But with more NIL this offseason, hopefully, there's probably going to be more opportunity to get more talented players. So as ugly as it was, hopefully it was a learning experience for the entire program of what they're going to have to do going forward to be a much, much better basketball team. Comment your thoughts in the comment section below. You're good, you're bad, and you're ugly from Syracuse basketball in the regular season. From here on out, it's a one-game season. Syracuse wins, they keep playing, they lose, the season is over. Literally, not figuratively. Now, as far as what is coming up here on Locked On Syracuse, well, Syracuse basketball, they are in action in round one of the ACC Tournament against Florida State tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern, and there will be a full post-game reaction podcast. If Syracuse is fortunate enough to beat Florida State, they will play on Wednesday against SMU at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And if Syracuse basketball pulls a stunner and they win 2 games in the ACC tournament, well, we know who their third matchup will be. It'll be Clemson on Thursday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. So that's what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse. And thank you for making this show your first listen today. And for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. March is here, so be the most informed college basketball fan throughout the madness. You can find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe, tell all your friends, and I will see you all again soon.